My guest today is TJ Hoffman and his film documentary, Roadie. My documentary spans his 20-year career of being a roadie turned filmmaker that includes insights from many of his friends in the touring industry. Now, TJ spent most of the 1990s and 2000s crisscrossing the planet with bands like M.O.D, Agnostic Front, Ignite, and many more. Even one of his fondest memories during this period was pulling triple duty as tour manager, drum tech, and guitar tech for Skid Row, the opening act for the legendary Kiss tour that, well, it was the last outing with the original members of the band. So after 20 years with a truckload of video to work with, TJ thought, why not a documentary film about roadies? And with that, let's welcome filmmaker TJ Hoffman and his film, Roadie, My Documentary, to the show. Welcome, TJ.
Hello, sir. How are you?
I'm doing great. First off, I have to brag. I love this film documentary. I have spent so much time backstage with some legendary heavy metal bands, and it's great to see how the back end of this whole situation actually works and the people that put on the show. So what was the main reason for you that you wanted to shine a light on the roadie and make a film about them?
So there was a point in my career where I was ready to come off the road, and I had a lot of knowledge and experiences, and being just this kid from Jersey with really no musicianship under his belt, got to experience what I experienced. So I started to write a book, '06, '07, just putting my thoughts together, drafting pages and pages. A friend of mine in California, he said to me, "Hey, I know you're writing this book, but there's a writer's strike in LA, and there's going to be this new thing called like reality TV." And back then, they didn't even use unscripted. So I dropped the book and I started to draft episodes, if you will, of what really happens backstage. And it was kind of based along the lines of like the American Chopper, Paul Sr., Paul Jr. It was with me and my brother and some of the local crew guys that I work with. And we just for fun on Mini DV were putting these skits together, and we went to go pitch a reality show about the roadie. And that lasted for a couple of years. We had a production deal. It was all going forward. The biggest obstacle was television, music, and legal banged heads. It just was not going anywhere anytime fast, and I couldn't absorb flying from New York to LA back and forth to try to make it work, just myself. So I kind of shelved it, and like you said earlier, I had all this footage, whether it was from the '80s, '90s, 2000s, the new stuff that we filmed, other interviews, and on a beach in Huntington Beach, California, with the Ignite guys, I just said, I think I want to put a doc together. With Brett Rasmussen, the bass player, I said, would you help me facilitate that? And the doc was born. And I originally I wanted to be Michael Moore, and I wanted to be the guy that went in there, kind of like, this undercover guy that really exposed what happened backstage, to give the viewer, the audience, a backstage peek behind the curtain, and that so that they really understood when they bought a ticket for 80, 100, 200, $400, where that's going and what it really takes to put on a live event. That's
Yeah,
how it started.
well, you covered it too. I mean, my favorite film genre is documentaries because I like to learn. I want to know the history of things, and you bring a lot of that history into the documentary. I mean, there were things that blew me away because I didn't even know how the roadie actually got started. But there's actually a big story behind that, and you show that in this film.
Yeah, a lot of the content in this film I stumbled upon by just asking questions and trying to meet the right people, right? And there's a lot of back and forth with, you go back to the early '60s and even to Woodstock and that kind of stuff, where there were live concerts, the Beatles, Shea Stadium, all those big events, and people argued with me that, you know, um, the Fillmore wasn't the place. And okay, I'm not perfect, but at the end of the day, it really tells the picture of the beginning. right? Maybe that wasn't the exact beginning technically, but people would get an idea of kind of how it evolved to what it is today.
Well, yeah, because you give the history of Bill Graham,
Yeah.
and when you brought that forth, then all the pieces started to be put together because that wasn't even just about how the in a way how the birth of the roadie. It was really the birth of how concert tours actually started, and I thought that was the coolest thing ever.
Yeah, Chris Samarczyk, who was in that segment with me, he was a co-producer for that segment and really put a lot of time and effort in working with me on that. When we went to visit him, we got some access to the Fillmore, and their staff were very gracious and welcoming. And listen, I learned just as much as you did watching it for the first time because I knew there was history there, but I didn't know exactly what the history was going to be, and that just opened up more doors. And with Chris's involvement, and well as other ones, he says this is great, but you got to talk to this guy. And since you're going to talk to this guy, and we're going to talk about this, then you got to go over and let's go talk to them. And it just evolved and blossomed into this doc. This is what I have. This is the best I can do.
Yeah, I think one of the things that kept rolling through my mind with the early parts of the documentary was looking at the staircases that everyone was hauling their gear up. And I'm looking at that thinking, you know how big some of these cases are, especially like with the for the drums, the amps. I mean, one guy is not going to be able to haul that. It's going to take kind of a miniature crew hauling that up there. Let's say on a Friday, and then loading it back up in the van on Sunday.
Yeah, and Chris kind of went through that where there was a crew of people, and once they got the stuff up the steps, that was maybe the same backline for a couple different bands where they shared, drum kits or amps, and then they had to keep rotating it from the front of the stage to the back of the stage. So, and that happens today with festivals, right? The drums are on a riser that rolls, and stage A and stage B. That's part of it today, and I credit Chris for explaining that part. Again, people don't know that. They don't they don't get it with, forget the oomph power and the muscle, but just the logistics of backing up trucks to get to those stairs and loading in and loading out, and the actual artists getting in and getting access, going over. It's difficult. So I think Chris did a really good job, and I hope that it painted a nice picture for the viewer.
Oh, it was a perfect picture that you painted in this documentary. And when it comes to the roadie, has the definition of a roadie changed over the years?
Yeah, I think so. And I asked that question because I don't want to offend these guys. When I started in the '80s, a roadie was just that: move some cases, get them up the steps, get them down the cellar, wherever, throw them up on stage. A lot of times, the artists themselves were doing all the plugging in and making sure that the rig worked fine. And then it was hang out, drink beer, buy girls shots, see what happens with some phone numbers, and then when the show's over at 3 in the morning, bring all this shit back and throw in the van, and it was like perfect job. I'll take it. I'm in.
Well, it's funny because fans don't really understand that today, and I'll use modern day, that roadies are not slackers. They are now highly professional techs. I mean, many who became roadies are now top techs in guitar, keyboard, drums, production lighting. Some of them became record producers. So there can actually be career advancement of sorts, right?
Well, you have all that as well, but some of these, which a lot of people don't know, Lemmy from Motorhead, he was a roadie for Jimi Hendrix. Noel Gallagher, he started as a roadie too. Toby Morse from H2O, he was a roadie before he started his band. So a lot of these guys that work as roadies with bands sometimes become rock stars themselves. So there's a lot that can be learned from just being in the environment of live music.
Yeah, there's a I think the best line in this whole film is that all techs are roadies, but not all roadies are techs.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a good one. So that was actually my brother that said that. And we've been bouncing around, behind scenes on behind backstages for a long time, and we had a lot of fun. Again, I'm not a musician, but I knew enough to get around, and I was reliable. And we plugged stuff in, and it didn't blow up. And as the years evolved, I got to be an essential part of a band that they relied on me in case something did go wrong, and to mitigate all that before it affected the live show. And that talent sometimes is more valuable than a guy that can play a ripping arpeggio on stage for sound check. It's just not necessary. So I learned to navigate my way through the business to be somewhat successful. Right, I was very blessed and fortunate to have the life that I did. I got to see the world basically with bands and my friends. I didn't make a lot of money, but for me, it wasn't about that at the time. So it was a process.
Well, it's I've been backstage so many times with heavy metal bands that I've lost count. How many times I spent back and spent hours with these bands. And for you, what's your wildest story while being a roadie?
There's been some
Or
wild ones.
one that you can reveal that won't get you arrested.
Yeah, well, listen, that's part of the doc, right? That's why my story made up a lot of the film, and how those segments made it into the final cut's another story. But being in recovery, I'm sober 18 years now, and I've lived the life of sex, drugs, rock and roll on the road. I got clean on the road, and I stayed sober on the road. So the the days of pre-internet, pre-cell phone are by far the most memorable, because you went backstage after your setup and there was catering or some food, but there was nobody Skyping back home. There was no laptops. There was nothing else to do but, where's the beer from our rider? Where's the bottle of Crown? So let's just loosen up and have a drink. And then that set the night off. So there's a lot of those nights. And by the grace of God, I'm still here to talk about it. That I got pretty fucked up, Oh, sorry. But so those crazy stories, I'm not afraid to tell, because it makes up my being, and I share those stories, and I try to help others through my recovery process. But at the same time, I'm not here to get anybody indicted, divorced, or incarcerated due to some backstage antics. Um, I was blessed also to work for a lot of different genre bands. So I started in the big hair, the 80s rock and roll. I worked for a local band in New Jersey called American Angel that was kind of neck and neck with Skid Row before they broke off and made it big with Doc McGee. And that was a very different type of scene and atmosphere than when I went to go work for M.O.D at the Lowlands Festival or at Dynamo in Europe, because those festivals in Europe at that time were the biggest in the world. They were the best. I still think the Europeans do it spot on, meticulously. They're the best well-run events in the world. So I have those to talk about. And then I have all the interactions with the bands personally that I dealt with. I mean, I have a dozen Vinny Stigma stories from Agnostic Front that are just legendary, that I'm so grateful I got to spend time with those guys. Um, I worked for Snake for Skid Row for a couple of years, on and off after the 2000 tour as well, and I have great memories with them. A specific story, I couldn't even tell you where to start. It's difficult, but again, I'm blessed to have experienced those things, and I have all those that I'll take to my grave.
It's the life of the roadie, and even the life of a lot of these bands today. I mean, I remember when I was creating our heavy metal guitar show back in 2009, 2010. The biggest shock for me was spending so much time backstage. I didn't see drugs. Nobody was getting drunk. You had to deal with the tour manager. You had guitar techs, drum techs. If there was a keyboard, there was a tech for that. And it was so funny because one night we were backstage with Alter Bridge, and I kind of laughed because I realized then how things have changed. Because Miles Kennedy goes, "Where's my green tea?" And I started laughing as I'm like, Wow, we have come a long way. And now backstage in a lot with a lot of these bands is about as clean as Ozzy and Harriet.
Yeah, I joke, I joke here at home during my recovery process, um, that I tell them, I'm going to say, I'm going to ballpark '06, '07. There was literally more AA meetings backstage than there were keg parties. So I think a lot of bands have they when they stepped it up to that level, the crew knows that some of that stuff just stays to what we call the back lounge of the bus, and that's as far as it goes. One, for the image of the band. Two, for the professionality of that tech. And nobody crosses those lines anymore. And if they do cross the lines, they're typically out of a job pretty soon. It's um, it's a different world today, and I think if I was trying to break into the business now, what I knew then, I wouldn't get in. Right? You need to be as skilled. You need to wear a couple different professional hats, whether it's TM, front of house, just monitors, um, just power, lighting. Those things are all skilled, highly skilled positions, and you just can't walk in and I'd say to Rock Lidditz and Shoko and these guys and say I want to be a roadie and you get hired. It doesn't work that way. So
Well, you're right because it is now a full-blown job position and you got to have certain skills to get a job with these bands. And if you do the job very, very well, and you kind of alluded to this in the documentary, that once a particular tour is over, some people didn't want to go home for 1 to 2 months. They they were able to get hired on another tour and just continue on because some people truly love living on the road. Did you love living on the road?
I did. When I was on the road, I wanted to go home. I wanted to be in a bed where it didn't move. When I was home, I couldn't wait to go back on the road. Right? It's that love hate. But these guys, and I was blessed. I did 4 weeks in Europe, home for a couple, 6 weeks in Europe, home, America for a couple of months, home. I didn't really live away from home. Um, Bringing that up, it strikes me there's a very well respected front of house engineer in the business. I won't mention names that retired about 2 years ago, came off the road after a 20 something year career to go home to be with his wife and family. That lasted about 6 weeks. He he went back on the road immediately after that. It's kind of like one of our veterans that are so used to being in a team, a platoon, a family per se, away from home, that sometimes you come home and it's different. You're not sure how to function. So you can get along with people outside of the tour, and you know have some kind of disciplinary relationship with your family, with your kids, that kind of thing. But when you're living with them day to day, it's a different world, right? So this person went back on the road to keep his marriage together. It's a pretty interesting story. So it's almost like when you're incarcerated and you go out into the real world when you're set free. They don't know how to function in real society, so they make a career of living on the road. And a lot of people deal with that great, and they have great successful careers, and they make enough salary where they can work for years like that with small breaks, and then potentially retire with a nice package. They don't ever have to work again. But it's not for everybody. It's a hard life. You miss weddings, children being born, baptisms, all the personal events that we take for granted every day. These people are in, the Fargo Dome in North Dakota, missing a lot of these things. So, I give these guys today a lot of credit for being the pros that they are.
You are very transparent in this documentary about your own life. And you showed that it was tough to be married, uh, to raise a kid, for some to try to stay sober or try to stay out of trouble. And for a lot of roadies today, is it still just as hard to be married and have a family?
Oh, I 100%. I mean, it takes a special person. Just put yourself in the wife's shoes or the son or daughter's shoes. Where's dad? Where's mom? When are they coming home? They're not going to see my first piano recital at school. All those little firsts that parents enjoy with their families. It's just as hard on the family. And a lot of women, wives would say, if you go away for a year, I can't function. We're getting divorced. Right. So that happens. It's a reality of the business. And God bless the women and families that really stand behind the tech that's out there making this happen. It's difficult, and I give them a lot of credit for that because it's not for everybody.
Yeah. I mean, I think back in the birth of the smartphone, or I should say the iPhone was 2007. And prior to that, it was flip phone. So when the mobile phone came into the picture, did that help change anything backstage with the roadies and their relationships at home?
So as a tour manager, it was extremely helpful. Look, I'll never forget this. My first trip in Europe, I had a Deutschmark coin, and I had a Verizon or AT&T calling card number that I would put the Deutschmark in the payphone at a truck stop, enter my calling card number, call my mother. She was following me on my itinerary and with an atlas of the world. And I would just say, yeah, we're in Germany. We're here. Okay, everything's fine. I'll call you next trip. And then hurry up, get it out under a minute so I get my Deutschmark back. So that's what I was used to. I was used to maps, and I had countless catalogs of Motel Sixes and Best Westerns and hotel catalogs trying to find rooms. So when the phone came out, it was so much easier if I had a number in my itinerary or book of lies just to call up and on the spot. I can go anywhere and use this phone. Like, this is great. And then you got international plans. So if I was in Belgium or Netherlands, I can call wherever I need to. So it was great for that. Fast forward, like you said, with the iPhone, and now you have a camera attached. Now every picture is forever, right? So there's that element of be careful. You can't always act like a Mama Luke because somebody's going to film you, and it could hurt you, and you could lose your job. So
That's
there's
true.
there's pluses and minuses of all of that. I mean, I think that goes with every career today, right?
Well, yeah, but the coolest thing, and seriously, TJ, I loved this documentary of yours
Thank you.
because you take us back in a time when everything was so raw. It's kind of like, back in the 70s, the 80s, into the 90s, you could do anything. There's no proof of it today. There's no video. There's no photographs. You just have great stories to tell, and people can believe it or not. But we didn't have to have proof back then. And now we have to be careful because a lot of these artists, a lot of the roadies, a lot of the techs, they're on Twitter, they're on Instagram, and they have to be careful what they post. And so if you want to keep your job, you better keep your social media clean just as well. But I want to bring something up that really surprised me in this documentary. Why was it important to you and to tell the story of Cliff Burton of Metallica in this film?
There's another segment of this film that just fell into my lap. I did not go out to seek this. So that segment with Aidan Mullen, who is a well-respected guitar slash bass tech, was in Nashville at the time. I got introduced to him through a couple other people um, because he was at the time working with Peter Frampton. We were in Nashville filming for about a week, and it just worked out where he was going to be in Frampton's studio building a rig for the next tour that was coming up. So he invited me down, gave me a nice tour of the whole. We filmed about 6 hours walking through Peter Frampton's rig. I get to hold some of these guitars where these famous songs were written on it. It was my birthday. It was a fantastic day. Aidan is such a blessed man. He's awesome. We're wrapping up. We're literally breaking down all our gear and lights and cameras. And I just casually asked him, "So what's next for you? Where are you going?" "Well, it's a bus tour, and I'm always nervous about still getting on the bus." And how come? What? Well, and then he told me that he was on the bus with Cliff, and he's not a private guy, but when it comes to stuff like that, respectfully, he's very private. And as a filmmaker, I'm jumping in head first. Are you allowed? you want to talk about that? Are you allowed to talk about it? You know, this, I'm interested. And we broke the cameras back out, set everything back up, and he spilled his guts for about an hour or so. And I still get goosebumps to this day because I remember the feeling of the room when he was going through this story. And I had to, of course, chop it down to 12, 13 minutes, whatever. And unfortunately, I didn't get to use any other footage that we shot with him through the day. But I just thought that that's one of the dark sides of the industry, right? Yeah, the drinking, the drugs, sex, drugs, rock and roll, get that. But and Eddie Trunk, I think, said it the best is that you're traveling at night always. The bus drivers sleep during the day, the bus is parked, and you get back on the bus at night, 10, 11 o'clock, midnight, sometimes later. And these guys are doing 100 miles an hour down the road, and you go to sleep like you're at the Hilton. And it takes a lot of trust in that one person behind the wheel. So when the Cliff Burton story came out, I didn't do anything with it for a couple of days. I really had to sit on it, and we listened and watched it raw for a good couple of days. And I reached out to some people for permission, even though I didn't technically need it. I did not want to be that filmmaker that went and got some shit and some smut and did it to look like I was being, egomaniac or doing it for the money type of thing to make a movie. And I got Casey Burton, which was Cliff's sister. I got her permission to use Aiden's segment, and one, to tell the story because it's only really been told by the Metallica side. So I got Aiden's perspective of the story, but I think it was more importantly to have his legacy exposed again, and that what people may not have known about Cliff and Metallica and what went on in those years, to kind of give them a little peek behind more of a full encapsulated story of that whole thing. He was a great bass player, but he was also a great friend and family member to a lot of people, which a lot of people don't know that. So I thought it was important for me as a filmmaker to not sit on this, but to try to respectfully put it out there, to let his legacy live on.
And you did. You showed the utmost respect to, to Cliff Burton's memory, to his family, because the way that you moved this documentary when you got to that point for that story to be told, it was seamless. You moved the audience in so easy, but it also explains too that life on the road, regardless if it's the rock star or the roadie, things can happen. And I mean, I had a time when I interviewed Artemis Pyle from Leonard Skinner, and we talked about the plane crash. There are things that just happen that are out of our hands. But with the bus driver, yeah, everybody's traveling at night. The moment that gig is over, you're loading up the bus and you're hitting the road to the next city. And, not everybody has a fancy private plane like Iron Maiden does to travel anywhere they want to in a couple of hours. But yeah, you got to think about that bus driver, because he's probably been awake all day. And now, because this just as well as anybody, the bus driver sometimes acts like a roadie.
Yeah, technically they're part of the crew, right? But I've had many encounters with different bus drivers, USA and abroad in Europe, where they wanted to hang out and watch the show. I said, no, sir. You have a day room. You're going to sleep. You're not playing golf. I've had some problems, especially on some of the long drives. I mean, we had drives in Europe where we had to hire two bus drivers because I was not comfortable with them doing more than 8, 9 hours behind the wheel, trekking across Europe. So there's that. The bus drivers, they're fans as well, and they don't ever get to see the show because they're sleeping when we're working and they're working when we're sleeping. So it's that job too. And Wayne from Pioneer Coach was very gracious and spoke a lot about that profession as an entertainer, coach, driver. That's not for everybody either. That takes a special kind of person.
It does, because I know here in the States, and I have talked to bus tour companies that lease buses out to, rock bands and country stars. And the biggest deal is you lease that bus, you get a driver, and that driver is limited to 8 hours. So that tour is planned, or if that band is going to have two bus drivers, like you said, one takes an 8 hour shift, and if you're not to your destination yet, the other guy comes in and takes over the driving. Because it's all about safety. And every once in a while, we'll hear about those accidents. Could be a blown tire or hitting a deer or whatever. But you show that in this documentary. That's the reason you just did an incredible job, TJ, because I just loved I actually want to go back and watch it again. And because there's just so much to it. But there was something in this documentary that I was so happy that you kind of highlighted, because a lot of fans don't understand. And I have friends that are multi-platinum record producers, and we've had this discussion before. Some of the greatest musicians in the world will never be famous. And Nick Hill in this documentary says that 9 out of 10 guitar techs are actually better musicians than the guy on stage. For a lot of fans, that's probably shocking to hear.
Yeah, there's been a couple of guys. Dennis McGivern also he made a comment like that. He's a phenomenal guitar player, and it's hard sometimes to work for a guy that you're better than, right? And these guys that are professional techs are probably also electrical engineers, um, and they have the experience playing, but they also can break down these rigs and that whole electronics part of it. And I'm going back to when I was working with Marshall JCM 800s with tubes, right before solid state became a real easier thing to manage. In Switzerland, you blew a tube on a Marshall. Now you can't just go to Radio Shack and get a tube, right? So trying to navigate that kind of stuff. But these guys also, and Dennis said it in the movie, that's your role. This is where I am, right? I'm not up there, I'm here. So I got to make this happen. And that was my mentality the whole time. Is my job is to be a fly on the wall, stay out of the spotlight, and make the band look as best they can. So it really hit me with Snake when I worked for Skid Row. And when I did a good job for Snake, he would give me the nod that I did a good job. He would look at me, he'd be playing to the crowd, and I felt his energy, not to me, but I felt his energy to the crowd, to the stadium. Then you feel the stadium's energy coming back to him. So it's a give and take always with the musician. Now, look, I'm just some kid, some punk on the side of the stage. I'm a nobody. But to know that I had a little tiny piece of that energy, and that they had a good show and the audience had a great show, they were happy with everything, that's rewarding internally. And that kind of momentum keeps everything going. And that to me is really important, because it's a thankless job. So,
Yeah. I
you
would say
know,
the roadie is a thankless job. And it reminds me of the story when, Tommy Thayer of Kiss, he was the guitar tech, and he knew every Kiss song. He knew how to play it. So Gene Simmons moves him in to take over Ace's spot, and it was a no-brainer, and it
yeah.
was seamless, and they just keep moving on. And other bands
Tommy
have done
was
the
the
exact same
tour
thing.
manager. I'm sorry, Ward, but Tommy Thayer was the tour manager for the Kiss 2000 tour. And I learned so much from him, just trying to follow his footsteps. There was a lot of people on that tour that I really elevated my game as a tour manager and then eventually production manager. So those stories are phenomenal, when it comes to roadies turning into on stage musicians.
Well, yeah, I mean, when I look at, we were backstage with Dream Theater, and you have John Petrucci, who has one incredible guitar rig. I mean, you literally would have to have a degree in electronics to figure that one out. And, and then you have the edge of U2 who, from what I've heard, can take as many as 34 guitars on tour and have a guitar tech that knows each and every single guitar, knows the particular tuning of each one. And if the gauge of strings are different depending on whatever the guitar is, that is a lot to keep up with. But that really goes beyond to just being a roadie, doesn't it?
Oh my gosh. Well, guys like that in that element, and I was fortunate. I saw you two at the Sphere, and that was a show. Those guys are pros. And if you ever watched any of the, for example, the U2 documentaries of their recording process, those guys that work for, especially if work for the Edge, they've been together 20 something years, right? They're like brothers. And that's something you don't learn overnight. That's a career move. Same thing with Pierre that works for Keith Richards. They've been together 20 years. So it's more than just guitars, tuning, and strings. It's everything that goes with it. How far is the amp from the monitor? I mean, you're right. There's so much. Go to Dream Theater with their complete stage show. And then how does that differ from their recording studio and how they transfer that same sound back and forth to make it sound like the record, but do it on stage in front of 100,000 people? So there's so many different elements, indoor, outdoor, studio, that these guys, yeah, not everybody can do it. Not every musician can do it.
Well, let me ask you this: because you were with Skid Row, you were on tour with Kiss because they were the headliner. At that time, was Kiss running one stage setup? Because if you compare things like U2's 360 tour, for example, and there's been other tours that are so large that there's actually two different setups. As one city is being set up and the band is performing, the second stage setup is already in the next city, setting up ahead of time. And then it's just leapfrogging one another on tour. Did Kiss do that?
No, Kiss had one setup, one stage. Um, I want to say eight tractor trailers, including Ted Nugent was the middle slot. So it was Ted Nugent's tractor trailer, and I believe 7 or 8 other ones. Rigging, lighting, sound, stage, carpentry rigs. And then us, we towed our small trailer with our bus. But yeah, so, that part I didn't even get a chance to touch on, but the riggers that go in at 4 a.m. start chalking the floor, marking points to drop the points to so that the lights and the sound gets suspended. They're up at the crack of dawn. They're in there early, and they're around almost all day. And they're the first ones in and last ones out. A lot of times, those guys are the ones with not running on a lot of sleep because they'll wrap up 1, 2 in the morning, and then as soon as they get to the parking lot of the next venue, they're starting to work again, and they don't get a lot of credit, those guys. But yeah, Kiss had just one stage setup. I couldn't imagine leapfrogging two systems and being responsible for all that. And those guys, there's all their production managers, and when you get to that level, they're geniuses and they're legends in the business.
Yeah, because I mean, I remember the days of like I'd done Rockstar, Metal Mayhem, and the big metal House of Blues type tours, and I'm running two cell phones. I have one for contacting all the tour managers, setting up all the interviews with all of the band members, and then you have another phone just ready to go in case you need to go above the tour manager and you need to talk to the actual manager of the band. And for you, because you were tour manager for Skid Row during that Kiss tour, what type of things did you pick up from Tommy Thayer that made you a better tour manager?
Well, Tommy Thayer was just one element on how he took care of the band, right? And he would escort them from the van to the venue and making sure they had everything and coordinating. The production manager at the time was Patrick Whitley, and the stage manager was Robert Long. And those two guys are legends in the business. Robert Long is very successful now with a lot of other bands. And so it's hard to, when I was sober and paying attention, I I was like listening to everything Tommy was saying and doing. When Tommy wasn't there, because the band wasn't on with us all the time, they flew, they did fly dates. But I watched Patrick and handle the stadium and the full production. I watched Robert, how he handled the stage and the corpse and the back line and where it was going. Um, all those elements, I really learned a lot, especially coming from the New York hardcore scene where anything goes. It's hardcore music. So yeah, loading's at 1 o'clock. We get there at 2 o'clock. Fuck them. We're here now. Let's go. Well, with those types of guys, if you miss load in time, there's no unions. There's nobody there to load. The loaders aren't there, so you got to do it yourself. Sometimes you got to park far away. So I learned quickly to fall in line to their regiment, and I used my experience with that for the rest of my career, and I tried to pass it on to others as well. Whether it was a small production or a large production, that was a very great year for me to really mold and hone my skills and take my tour management title to another level.
Yeah, and I can see that. And you even bring a little bit, there's a little bit of a dark moment in this documentary. And I want to ask because has the life of the roadie changed since the days of Dimebag Darrell when he was killed on stage, even to the terrorist attack during the Eagles of Death Metal concert? Has things changed since that day?
I think they've changed exponentially. I think that the term security guard or security detail, I think, is more profound in the industry. A lot of bands are more cognizant about their surroundings and where they are, whether it's political turmoil, even gang related. Um, there's a lot of elements in the world in general that you need to be conscious of. And yeah, it's very sad when one person decides to take another person's life, especially in an event where music is supposed to bring people together and it's supposed to bind us so we can forget about the outside world for a while. So it's sad, and I think what it did was create another line item in the budget for these bands to have some type of security, knowing that they can focus on their music and pleasing the crowd and not having to look over their shoulder. Um, are we safe? Right. So I
Yeah,
think
I've
that's a
heard the
big thing.
stories. I mean, I've asked recording artists when they stepped out on stage, what was going through your mind when Dimebag was killed, or if there was an attack of some sort, and they said after all of those things had happened, it was tough because now it's playing on your mindset. You go out on stage, you think all the fans love you, but is there one pissed off fan that thinks he needs to solve a situation because you busted up another band? Of course, Dimebag didn't bust up Pantera, but um, that was a whole different deal. But that wasn't Dimebag's or Vinny's fault at all. Things happen, bands break up, but fans don't need to be taking it personally. Of course, I think that guy had a little mental situation going on at the same time, but people were in fear for a while, and then eventually, you just kind of get back into the groove, and it just kind of comes back to you. But there's a line in this film where the road chooses the roadie. But is that true today?
Listen, it could for some people. I said it. I said I didn't choose to go on the road. I started. I was interning in a recording studio, learning sound. That amazed me, and I was just fortunate enough to work in a session and met Billy Milano, and he liked what I did in the studio and says, "You want to come on tour with us?" And it had nothing to do with that I was only making $50 a day. It had nothing to do with the price. He just liked me as a person. Um, so that's how it evolved to going. The road chose me, and I went. I could have very easily said no, but I didn't hesitate for a minute. I jumped on the opportunity to go, see the world. Um, These days now, look, you have like Full Sail University, and you have a lot of places that are grooming these people to be potential um, roadies, sound guys, lighting, whatever it may be, um, to advance their career. Now, whether they choose to stay on the road or stay local and work at a house of blues and being a house sound, or in a casino, that path usually comes to light once they get into the scene and they can choose their direction. The path less chosen. So I think for everybody, it's different, their makeup. A lot of people they want to be free. They want a nomad. They'll have a small apartment and just put me on the road in a bus. I'm good living out of a duffel bag. This is great.
Yeah,
Who
I
knows?
also love the fact that in this film that you talk to a lot of, I'll just say you talk to a lot of roadies, where some of them didn't mind the term roadie. Others were like, well, I'm a tech. And and I really love the thought process behind the whole word because yeah, when you think of a roadie, some people think it's slacker. Back in the day, or hey, I work for beer, and but now it's a professional gig. So I kind of lean towards the guys that want to be called techs now because it's the true sense of the word now.
Right. But, it comes under the umbrella of road crew, right? So you're technically not a roadie. And I asked that question because I didn't want to offend these guys. They are top pros and they do stuff that I can't do. But if you ever saw the Meatloaf movie, Roadie, from the 70s, that's what it was. He was just a big guy moving some gear around. So it was roadie. And most of the people don't get offended when another roadie is calling him that, right? Because I was a roadie. I groomed to be, and I should even call myself a tech because I got around what I needed to get around, and I learned what I needed to learn for that artist or for that band. But I never took it to the next level, like when I'm home for 2 weeks to try and take apart this Marshall and put it back together and solder this. No way. That's not for me. That's not where my head's at. These guys live and breathe this stuff. And listen, kudos to them. That's their life. And thank God for them because we wouldn't have the shows that we have without them.
Yeah, I've always tried to think about, out of all of the musicians out there, if they're guitar, bass, keyboard, or whatever, who would have the absolute toughest job making a particular artist shine? So I don't know if it would have been The Edge or someone like Joe Bonamassa because
Mm.
you're running so many different guitars, but you're running so many different types of amps. And we're not talking just Fender and Marshall. We're talking Dumble and Trainwreck. And that's a whole nother class.
Yeah, listen, you bring up a good point. And when you talk about guitars and rigs and sound on the technical ability of these guys, there's probably more people out there that can do that job than you think. For me, when I was choosing a road crew, it's more of the personality of the roadie. Can he get along with people? Can he get along with the crew? Can I live with this guy in a bus for a year and a half? Can I go have a pizza and a drink with this guy on the day off? What happens if shit goes wrong? Is he going to lose his mind? Is he going to be in control? And that goes with the artist as well. I mean, a lot of these guys that work for a lot of artists will never go back to work for the artist. I can't work with this guy. This guy is just unimaginable, his attitude. So there's technical ability, and then there's what Brett said in the film, punishers. You don't want a punisher on your crew. And there was a lot of times where um, I would dismiss some technical ability for a guy that we can get along with, personality wise, and live with and be a part of the family. That's more important.
Yeah, I get that. I get that. Because, like you said, you're living with somebody, you got to make sure that one side you can hang out with them, the other, they can do their job. And if you got to come down on them to tell them what to do, they're going to do it and not give you any back talk.
Right. Those guys that are lifers, that are long term career roadies slash techs, they know the end game. The bottom line is the show must go on. The show must go off without a hitch, and we have to get along and get this one done and move to the next one. Um, Geez, we started to put this together. I filmed Billy Idol's crew at the Stone Pony in Asbury Park. Rob Koenig was Billy Idol's lighting director at the time, who's now Rob is with Metallica. We're on the bus, and there's a photo on the bus wall of a guy, and underneath it, when duct tape and gaff tape was that guy. So filmmaker, I have to ask the question: who's that guy? What does that mean? And that he put that on the bus as a reminder that on every tour, every crew, there's one guy who's that guy that we don't want to have part of the family. So if you don't want to be that guy and put your photo on that wall, don't be that guy, and do your job and get along with the family. And I thought that was really clever, and it worked. Kind of almost like leave your ego at the door type of thing, because this is a machine and you're part of this machine. Don't fuck it up.
I love that. So for you, TJ, what are you doing now?
So I'm working on a couple other projects on the outdoor entertainment, skiing. I'm an endurance runner. So I've got my hands, I'm dabbling in some outdoor, not filmmaking, but some stuff like that. I'm working construction. It seems to be my bread and butter during the day. I'm just keeping busy and trying to promote this film a little bit. As everybody knows, the world went upside down and 180 degrees since COVID. So I've funded this entire movie myself. I paid everybody as I went. I don't owe anybody myself. I'm trying to recoup some of my losses based on what I was led to believe and how I thought that this movie would really take off in the doc world pre-COVID. And I'm blessed that we got to connect. Christine, that I work with, publicity. I do the Shiprocked cruise every year with the Ask For team. I'm on the video and photography team for those guys, and that keeps me involved in the scene. I get to see my friends doing these interviews with you. I get to meet new people and great friends, and I'm blessed that I get to do that and still talk about this film 5 years later. I think, when we were editing it, I didn't want it to be I wanted it to be a timeless piece. I wanted this film to be, you can watch it in 20 years and still understand it, and it's not outdated. So,
oh no, this isn't outdated at all. And where can everyone see the film?
So the website is roadiefilm.com. There's many platforms on there that you could click on and get the link to. The easiest is it's on Amazon. It's on Freevee. Doesn't cost anybody anything. So if you don't like listening to me, you could change the channel. I get it. Not everybody's going to like it. I've gotten very little hate mail. When we were doing this, my segments in the film were just placeholders because it was a poignant part, or it was a good line, or something that we wanted to leave into the sequence of the film, telling the story. So I told my editor, I told Andy Stroll, just leave me in there for now, but I'll get somebody famous to talk about that, and then we'll replace me later. I didn't want to be in front of the camera. And as this thing evolved, I shared the couple of rough cuts with my filmmakers in LA, and they wanted more TJ, which shocked me, but it opened up my eyes to, okay, if this is how I got to tell this story, and I got to put myself out there a little bit more, then this is the best film I could make with me in it. And that's the way we went. So I'm very blessed that I got to do that. I hope I can help other people in recovery at the same time and teach them a little bit about the career. And tell the fan that's spending $250 on a ticket, it's not all going to the band. There's a reason it's that price, So
I love it.
I'm very fortunate. Thank you, Ward, for the time.
You covered everything there is to cover about the Roadie. I'm glad that you were in it and told your own story, because that's the life of a roadie. There are ups and there are downs. And so people can come full circle. And TJ, you did that. And ladies and gentlemen, you want a history lesson in music? You need to see Roadie, My Documentary by TJ Hoffman. You will learn much more than the life and work of a roadie but the backstory on how the Roadie was born. For me, I absolutely loved this film documentary because I simply like to learn, and music history is full of never-ending stories. Roadies are the men and women who put together the show so the rock stars can shine and you can make a memory. Roadies are professionals and we salute you. And TJ, thank you so much for sharing your film with me today.
Uh, Listen, once again, I'm very humbled and blessed that we got to speak. And let me ask you something. All your years backstage, have you ever came across something that you never knew before about what happens back there with these people that you were taken back and surprised with?
I think the biggest thing that I took away was two things. How friendly everybody is, um, and how smart these people are. Roadies are intelligent. I never met a roadie who was a slacker because, we were dealing with, bands like Alter Bridge and, um, you know, you name it, Cannibal Corpse, the list goes on. Oh my gosh. People like Eric Johnson, So everybody to me was top notch, professional, fun to be around. You got to hear some of the cool stories of the past, and but everybody's a professional. And ladies and gentlemen, if you're a fan of music and you love buying a concert ticket, just because you see the musicians and your favorite artists on stage, you need to realize there are far more people backstage beyond a four-member band or an artist with a guitar. There is a crew behind stage that makes that experience just for you. So like I said, TJ, we have to salute the roadies, the techs, everybody involved, even the venues. I mean, the venues have their own personnel that works with the road crew to put these shows on, because in the end, it's creating lifelong memories that we're going to be sharing with other people.
Absolutely. The music endures, and that's the bottom line. It's a lifelong memory, and music brings people together.
Hey, that's it. And TJ, you keep on rocking and rolling, and we're going to shout this documentary from the top of the mountain because, ladies and gentlemen, you love music, then you need to see this documentary, Roadie, my documentary. Check it out. It's available online. Hey, for me, I spent the $3.99. So help TJ recoup some of that production cost because it doesn't hurt. Look, if you're used to buying a $200 concert ticket, then $3.99 is not going to hurt you one bit. But hey, here's the way I look at it. You pump into $3.99, TJ may come out with a whole new documentary that'll knock our socks off just like this one. So I want to thank you for watching, ladies and gentlemen. And as for me, you're either going to see me at the movies or from the red carpet.